I saw this going on yesterday, the day before is when I saw it, and I guess it's when it started. And I just didn't want to talk about it because there wasn't really enough that I saw for me to kind of have any form of understanding or information, so I wanted to wait. But I'm going to talk about this Silicon Valley Bank shit because people on the internet think that a bailout should happen and take place and that that's an answer. And I'm sure there's plenty of people, like celebrities and tech people, who agree with them. And I strongly disagree. Fuck. Why? Okay. I just don't agree with them. So we're going to read, and I looked over both these articles. I'm kind of going to go over the two of them because we're going to do it. This article is more recent than the other article. The other article also has a report from CNN inside of it that we'll watch. But I want to start with this one first and then go over there. And I'll kind of explain why, because the media is up to their typical shenanigans, and I think it's important to be called out because their shenanigans is dog shit. So this one's Vanity Fair, and they're saying that there's going to be no federal bailout for the Silicon Valley Bank, but that the FDIC auction is underway. Now, that's normal. That's the way it's supposed to work. The government's not supposed to bail out the banks. The banks have federal backing under the FDIC. And if they fail, your money is guaranteed up to, I think it's $250,000. So that's how this is supposed to operate. Is the government is supposed to only guarantee up to $250,000, not bail out banks for trillions of dollars and billions of dollars because of the negative impact that would have on you and me, the individuals, the people. Whereas if the bank fails, it's because the bank wasn't doing their job responsibly and they weren't doing their job well, just like any business, so they go under. And it's not the government's place to say whether or not this company deserves to survive or not, because then they're choosing favorites and it's not equal. Then there's no equality. You see what I mean? And that's not how things are supposed to work here. I could see this happening and making sense in other types of government, but here in the U.S., it doesn't make any kind of sense to take place. So the Treasury Secretary said, I guess today, because it's Sunday, that the federal government would not bail out the banks, which is good to hear. But they're working to help depositors, add that regulators are looking into a wide range of available options, which means selling the bank. It means giving back that $250,000 that the government guarantees through the FDIC, things of that nature, which is Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which is the only thing that backs up any of your money that is in a bank. It's why you should be only banking at banks that have this guarantee. And they have little signs that say FDIC at the banks that do. They're all over the place at the banks that do. And you can use any bank that does it. Personally, I would suggest a local credit union because they typically are investing the money in the bank that's a profit into your local community. So it will have an impact on you, and you actually have a say, typically speaking. I know, like, I've been at the same credit union forever, and I can tell you that I have gotten little sheets and emails and things from them to vote on my opinion of what they should invest the money into. It doesn't always go my way. In fact, most of the time it doesn't go my way because of where my bank is at and the thought processes of the people who live there. However, I do get to have a say. Whether or not I get my way with it because of everybody else's vote, I do have the opportunity to voice my opinion in that way. So I would recommend everybody does it that way rather than going to something like Chase Bank, right? So that it's all up to you. Everything's got its ups and downs, but that's my personal preference and why I would recommend that. So this is the first bank failure since 2020 at a world, and it happened in 48 hours. So this started Wednesday, And by Friday, they were collapsing, and which is crazy. And Wednesday, they'd asked for $2.25 billion from their investors. That's a lot of money. Now, what Silicon Valley Bank does primarily is they work with tech companies and giving loans to people who are trying to build tech, or companies like Google that are trying to get more money to invest into tech, right? So that's the type of thing that they're doing. It's not very, there are obviously going to be people who are using that bank as a normal bank, but for the most part, it's companies. It's companies that make technology, and they've been borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, and that's pretty much how it's been going. So the Treasury said that they're concerned about depositors, and we're focused on trying to meet their needs. Now that should be the focus, because that means you. That means you, the average person who just needs somewhere that your bank, somewhere to put your money, to keep it in a bank, so that you have your card, you can buy shit, your money gets deposited there. Maybe you get a little bit of interest off of your savings account every year if you've got enough in there, or whatever the deal may be. That depositors means you, not people who are investing, not people who are borrowing money and taking out loans. It's people with a bank account at that bank. So Margaret Brennan asked if they'd consider a foreign bank swooping in to help the situation, and they said that's up to the FDIC, because now the FDIC has control of the bank, because the feds are in there handling the collapse to make sure that the FDIC money is handled correctly and people get their money for depositing in that bank and banking there. They're doing their job. Essentially, the government is doing their job on this, is what that means. And since they are in there, they may or may not allow a foreign bank to come in and buy it. And I really hope they don't, because we don't need more foreign influence on technology and business in America right now. It's pretty much outsourced for the most part, and we really don't need more of that influence. We already, especially in California of all places, where we see people come out and make apologies like John Cena did, because of making a comment about Taiwan being a country and China not liking it. So he came out and apologized so that his movie would be put out in China, because China said, we just won't allow your movie here then if you're going to have this comment. So he had to come out and apologize and pander to China. What do you think would happen if China came in and saved this bank? Do you think that the tech companies that are borrowing billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars would then not be beholden to China over the US, even though they are US based? Yes, they would. So I hope that doesn't happen. It doesn't mean that China would be the ones who did it. It could be the UK. It could be Germany, right? It could be all kinds of different places. But we should not allow that to happen, because then these companies are going to be beholden to them. And we've seen how this has worked historically speaking. And I'm not trying to pick on anybody or whatever, but the fact is, if these banks, or if we allow a foreign bank to come in and buy up, save this bank, save the Silicon Valley Bank, and then that company, or that country, geez, if that country starts doing something horrendous, like, I don't know, 1930s, 1940s Germany, we'll use as an example because everybody knows what that was. All of a sudden, our tech companies are facilitating funding for that the same way that, say, Big Daddy Bush was, which is what I call George H. Bush, not W. George H., the first Bush that was president, his dad was doing. He was helping fund that German party, which is part of why I chose them. So that's kind of my point, is you don't want, like, if it's in our country, we're responsible for what our country is doing that's horrendous. But if it's not our country and then we end up taking issue with what that country is doing, do we want to have all of the money that especially the tech industry is generating, helping fund them through this bank? Do we want to take that chance of that happening again? Or would we rather have it contained here where we're able to have some sort of influence on it? Because if that were to happen, we're going to freeze that bank forcefully, and then what's going to happen? They're not going to have any access to any of the money at all, because it's run by that nation. We will freeze all the bank's money, which would be you as the person with an account in that bank not being able to access any of your money and pay your bills, because we'll freeze the whole bank. So that's why I think it's a bad idea. Not only that, but it would also freeze the ability of these businesses to do anything if they're relying on their money from loans from that bank, because they, once again, will not be able to access it. So long-term view, I think it's a bad idea, and I'm not about it. So I hope that doesn't happen. So they also underscored this situation is very different from 2008 for the people who do remember what it was like in 2008. I watched my dad lose his business in 2008, like 2 businesses in 2008. One of them was just timing and such. There was a lot involved with one of the businesses. It was young, growing for about 9 months or so, and then 2008 happened. So it was just unrecoverable. So that's kind of the issue with that. And then we have Gavin Newsom, which I don't know why he's still the governor. Didn't everybody want him gone that was in California? Didn't a lot of people want him gone? And somehow you guys voted him back in? What the fuck was that about? That makes no sense. If you're voted out of office, shouldn't you just not be able to ever run again? Just throwing it out there. Like, you were removed from office prematurely, like before your term ended because of outcry from the people, then maybe you shouldn't be able to ever run for political office again. You were clearly not trustworthy. And what he said is, over the last 48 hours, I have been in touch with the highest levels of leadership at the White House and Treasury. So he's been talking to the president and the United States Treasury. Everyone's working with the FDIC to stabilize the situation as quickly as possible. But like I said, they're doing their jobs. They're doing what needs to be done. So they're doing it to protect jobs, people's livelihoods, and the entire innovation ecosystem that has served as a tent pole for our economy. Now, this isn't a tent pole for the U.S. economy. It's a tent pole for California's economy, which California says is the reason that they would be capable of sustaining themselves as a nation outside of the U.S. when they feel like they don't like that they didn't get their way with their policies on a national level and didn't get to force their views upon every individual state in the nation, because it's not how the country works. So what they mean by a tent pole is, if you have a tent, they're talking like, when you use this phrase, you're talking like a circus tent, where you've got the one huge pole up in the middle and then everything else comes out from it. And if you pull that center tent pole out, it collapses and everything crumbles. That's what he's talking about. And to be quite honest, the reason that this innovation ecosystem is a tent pole is because of the fact that Hollywood, which used to be the primary source of income and revenue for California, and I'd assume should still be, has actually gone down, and it's been investing. Say they get a movie come out and they say, oh yes, we made $1 billion of revenue on ticket sales off of this movie in the first 3 weeks or the first month. Well, they also spent $1 billion on that movie. They aren't really turning much of a profit. Their profit margin is incredibly small, and it's not enough to sustain over a long period of time. They just have the money sitting around to be able to continue doing it. And it's not something that's going to be sustainable over the long term. And that's why innovation and technology specifically, because it's not just innovation. Innovation would be just new invention as a whole, and this is strictly affecting technology innovation, not just general innovation. So he doesn't have much of an idea of what the hell's going on, which is kind of funny, but once again highlights the fact that he just should not be the governor, and he's wanting this to be propped up and make it into being a tent pole because of the fact that that's where he gets his money. His money, Like, you understand that as the governor, he shouldn't be making nearly as much money as this guy does. And the reason that Gavin Newsom makes the amount of money he does is because of his ties to this industry. He's not going to make much money if this bank falls. He's going to lose money. That's why he gives a shit. So let's keep that in mind. The House Speaker, which is Kevin McCarthy, said on Fox's Sunday Morning Futures that the Biden administration has the tools to handle the current situation. They do know the seriousness of this, and they are working to try to come forward with some announcement before the market opens, which would be tomorrow. He also said that he hoped the Silicon Valley Bank would be purchased, which is possible, but the odds of that happening are incredibly slim because that would have to happen today, right? So it's just the odds of it happening before the markets come out is going to be very low. If nothing happens, pretty much all of the markets are going to take a hit. Stocks are going to go down significantly. If you are somebody who's interested in stocks, I am not, and I'm not giving you like stock purchasing advice. I'm just saying that if it were me and I were somebody who purchased stocks, that's what I would do, because they're all going to come down, and the only way that they can move after this collapse is they can only go up. So, but I don't buy stocks, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to consider, and I've actually been thinking about it since I heard about this. So I'm probably not going to do it because I don't like the stock market. But, and like I said, I'm not giving anybody stock advice or financial advice. I don't have the insight into that. I'm not a stockbroker, but it has made me consider it, because that's going to be what happens. Is this does impact stocks. We saw this in 2008. And then all of those areas of stocks, after collapsing terribly low, came up to record highs years later. It was a long-term investment. It's not like you put your money in those stocks and you got it back in a week. It was a very long-term investment, but they did reach record highs when they came back. But it does create an immediate issue. And what he's talking about with they have the where was it? They have the tools to handle the current situation. He's talking about a bailout. That's what he means. He's talking about a bailout. The FDIC isn't going to save the bank. It's just going to bail them out. And this has expanded overseas. It's impacted the Bank of England, and the UK said, we will not bail them out. We're going to let them collapse. You're a failed business. You're a failed company with a failed design. That's your problem. It was your risk, and these are the repercussions of setting up your business and failing. Good on them. In all honesty, good on them. That's exactly how it should work. It's exactly how it should work. And to be quite honest, I hope that's what we see. Like, it'll suck in the short term, but we will bounce back. It always bounces back. But if we bail them out, we're just postponing the inevitable the same way we did in 2008. That's why we're still dealing with issues. That's why we're still in a recession now. That's why people struggle so much. That's why pretty much my entire life I've watched people not be able to make it. It's why people aren't able, like, you're telling me that you can make $100,000 in this country, and in most of the country's populated areas, which isn't the majority of our country, it's just major cities, $100,000, you're barely getting by. So that's absurd, absolutely absurd. I believe everybody can agree that that's not right, especially when the median wage is somewhere closer to 35,000. So 100,000 and you're barely getting by, but most people make a third of that. Yeah, that's horseshit. So let it fall. It'll end up eventually, everything's cost will have to come down to match it, or everything will collapse. Every one of these large corporations will end up collapsing. When things like this happen, if they don't end up responding in a way that they can still sell goods, they're going to face the same problem because they're not conducting business, right? So it's a bit of a domino effect. But I wanted to point this one out because they brought in the UK. It's a more recent article, and I kind of paused here and there so that the portions of this that I'm not going to read, because I'm not going to read through the whole article, you guys can see and read through. Now we're going to go over to this one, which is CNN Business. So, and this was, I forgot what day. This was from yesterday. So they point out that this is the go-to bank for U.S. tech startups. right? So that's the Silicon Valley area. And the reason Silicon Valley is so prominent, the reason that there's so many tech companies there and all of this is like this is where these people were when it started. But our government used to fund this. Our government used to have a lot of incentive for people to do this, and that was why all of these businesses popped up. This bank came in and filled the gap that was left behind basically when the government stopped funding it so much, because it was a limited time thing, as it should be. So there's that. Excuse my runny nose, my perpetually runny nose from being around burn pits. Like, I'm sorry, I do try to do stuff about it with like allergy pills and medication that I get from the VA. Nothing really works. It does the best it can, but nothing really works perfect. So it was founded in 1983, so 40 years ago. Specialized in tech startups. As just a little rundown of its history, while relative to unknown to outside of Silicon Valley because nobody else is there using it. And it's pretty much just within that industry, which is pretty much right there. Basically, it's all right there in one area, which is a huge flaw. It should be more dispersed because of things like this, really, and natural disaster and things like that. It should be more dispersed. It's ridiculous that it's all in one spot. So why did it fail? Because of a classic run on the bank. The longer version is a bit more complicated. Several forces collide to take down the banker. Forces collided. Okay, like that makes it sound like it's coordinated. And this is part of why I wanted to do this one later after the first one, is because we're going to see the way the first one that we went through was very informational. Vanity Fair did a very informational piece where they told us things. They gave us quotes. They didn't really explain what those people were referring to, but they gave us some quotes from people that are involved and have some insight. It was more of the way that you would like to see news reported. CNN is giving us what we typically get out of the media, which I like to call peddling fear and hate. That's the business they're in. It's the business they conduct, and that's what we're seeing. So several forces collided to take down the banker. That makes it sound like it's coordinated, like it was by design. So they're setting this up to make tech companies look like a victim. First, there was the Federal Reserve, which began raising interest rates a year ago to tame inflation. Yes, they did, because that's the only thing you can do to tame inflation. And the fact that interest rates were at basically zero meant that we were going to have an issue, and that we were going to see a spike in this, in our interest rates to balance it out. For instance, for the last year and a half, 2 years, well, for the last like 3 or 4 years almost, we saw interest rates that were minus the last year. They went up in the last year. But prior to that, we had record lows on the housing market's interest rates, so mortgage rates, right? It was less than 1% in a lot of cases. So maybe it was 1%, maybe it was 2%. They were insanely low. I experienced this personally, refinancing the house that I had and being able to go from having an already extremely low rate of almost 3%. It was a little more than 3%. It was like 3.4 or something. And I was able to refinance my house to 2.7, I believe, at the time. That's nothing. That's a big nothing burger of interest. What that means is eventually they're going to have to raise interest rates because it's going to have a negative impact on everything. So the only way they can fix that is raising the interest rates. And the interest rates when I got my new house now were like 6%. It was between 6 and 7%. And people are complaining that, oh, the interest rates, they're unreasonable. Don't buy a house. Don't buy a house. The reason I didn't care and the reason I didn't listen to it is because historically speaking, mortgage rates are usually between 10 and 20%. They're usually closer to 15, 16% is where they are usually at. So 7% is still a steal, historically. It's the cost of houses that's actually made it very difficult. It's not the interest rates. It's the fact that now houses cost hundreds of thousands of dollars instead of tens of thousands of dollars like they used to. So, but yes, okay, interest rates going up. That's because of the Federal Reserve, which is not in any way, shape, or form related to the government. They just get to decide money for our government, which we should have never surrendered to them ever. So higher borrowing costs sapped the momentum of tech stocks and had benefited the bank, which obviously, because businesses aren't going to qualify for as much money. Startups definitely aren't going to qualify for as much money. So they have to assume a larger risk, is what it is. Higher interest rates also erode the value of long-term bonds, which basically is their stocks. That's a them problem. That's a them problem. Why are they using bonds? Why are they using bonds instead of the money that's in the bank the way that they're supposed to operate? Because they're taking risky chances. That's why. So, but it's not just them. Many banks have been using them. Many banks do use them, and it puts them at risk. So they had a $21 billion portfolio, was yielding an average of 1.79%, which is nothing. It should be higher. It should be. For them to be able to remain in business, it should be higher. Like the national treasure, or the current 10-year treasury yield is about 3.9%. So they're getting about half of what the average is according to the treasury. That's a them problem. It's their fault, and it's their own doing. And it's probably because of their ties to these businesses and the fact that they're basically colluding with these businesses to aid these businesses to as much as possible, because the bank decided that these businesses were a can't fail type of thing. That was probably because of 2008 and thinking that they were just going to be able to get bailouts on tech because tech is a big business. So too big to fail was the thing used in 2008, and leading up to it in 2007. So that's what's going on. So then they had panic. Okay, there you go. They'd sold a bunch of its securities at a loss, which means they irresponsibly sold stuff because they were hurting for money because they weren't running their business appropriately. So when the bank announced it sold securities at a loss, what that means is something to use stocks or cryptocurrency works the same way. As an example, if you pay, let's use simple small numbers to keep things easy. If you pay $100 for that stock or cryptocurrency, and then you keep hold of it, you don't ever spend your cryptocurrency, you're just holding on to your stock, whatever it is, you're just hoarding it. And then you go, oh no, I'm in financial trouble, and then you sell it, and the current market is selling or purchasing that stock or that currency for, say, $15 now, not $100. That means that you're selling that currency or that stock for an 85% loss. So that's what's going on here, is they made investments that they then had to sell because those securities are investments. So they spent more money on those investments than they were able to get back because they were financially hurting and needed the money to stay afloat. So they had to sell it for less than they had spent. So they sold at a loss. Had they been able to hold it, then they probably could have waited till it came up, and they could have sold it for $110 and gotten a 10% return on their investment. Instead, they sold it for a loss of their investment, which is the way it works. You don't actually gain or lose any money when you buy things like that until you sell them. Once you sell them, you gain or lose. Just because the market moves doesn't mean it's gone. Yours is just sitting there idle until you sell it. When you sell it is when you either gain or lose. So That's just how math works with that, and people fail to explain that constantly because they want you to sell your investments at a loss so that they can scoop them up and hold on to them until they come back for a profit, and then they sell them, and then they buy something else that you are now selling at a loss, which is why I personally do not fuck around with stocks. It's not a good idea, at least in my eyes. A lot of people benefit from it because they pay attention to the market. I don't. That's why I don't like it. It just seems to me like gambling, and I'm not into it. So the bank's stock began plummeting. Why are they stock? Why are they a stock? I wouldn't want to be part of a bank that's a stock because then it's at huge risk to swings in markets. Why would you do that to yourself? So drag their bank shares down, and then their investors get afraid, and then they start backing out of things. They start moving their loans. They start doing all kinds of things like this, and that will negatively impact the bank as well. So by Friday morning, their shares were halted in an abandoned efforts to quickly raise capital or find a buyer, and that's why we are where we are with the FDIC now in there trying to get this kind of settled and protect the people who use the Silicon Valley Bank as a normal bank. So that's what it is. And then everything subsides. Wall Street's going to panic because now we have people who are looking at losing money because they've invested into these things, and it's going to have repercussions amongst other things, obviously, which they mention as being a domino effect. That's the way it goes, as I've explained already. It's already just, that's the way it's set up. That's the way the system works. And I don't know that there's another way that the system could work, to be quite honest. If a bank falls, it's going to create a domino effect because the banks are where you get your loans from. You might go through something that doesn't have like Chase Bank tied to it as an example, or like, I don't know, Wells Fargo tied to it, or a credit union tied to your loan. But make no mistake, the company that handles your loan is a bank. It's a subsidiary of a bank or of several banks that have come together to create that company that gives those loans. You're dealing with a bank. So when banks collapse, it creates a huge domino effect, which is why in 2008 they said that they were too big to fail. So while broader contagion is unlikely, smaller banks that are disproportionately tied to cash-strapped industries like tech and crypto may be in for a rough ride, according to Ed Moya, senior market analyst at Oanda, however you pronounce that. I don't know where that is. I don't know how to pronounce it. I did my best. So he says everyone on Wall Street knew that the Fed's rate hiking campaign would eventually break something, and right now that is taking down small banks. That is not true. That's not true. What it's taking down is the banks that have bad practices, and this is what I'm talking about. They are once again peddling fear in this article to make people afraid of what's going to happen. Right? They aren't trying to give you any kind of insight. They aren't trying to give you any kind of just knowledge. They're purposely finding a quote from somebody who's saying, well, the feds did a rate hike. Well, it wasn't the feds. The feds implies that that's the government. The government did not create a rate hike. The Federal Reserve created a rate hike because these banks keep printing money, because the Federal Reserve has said that okay, yeah, you can make more money. You can keep printing money. You can have more money at your bank that you have access to spending that to this percentage than what you actually have at your bank, because we will allow it, because it's how we maintain the economy according to how the Federal Reserve runs things. But that also creates inflation and prevents you from having the purchasing power you should have with your dollar. So what happens here is he's made it sound in the way that they've gone about doing this, because they didn't even put in an editor's note to clarify that this is the Federal Reserve's fault, not the government's fault, that these rate hikes are going to make it terrible and it's going to take down small banks. No, it's only going to take down the banks that are investing heavily into these types of industries exclusively because they're foolish. Why are they not diversing investment to protect themselves from this? That's why this bank is having this problem. They were almost solely investing in the technology industry and small startups within technology. Had they been doing that, as well as real estate, as well as people with shops in the local area, like restaurants and things like this, as well as people like, I don't know, car industries and companies, and see what I'm getting at here? Grocery stores. You could be investing across the board and you could protect some of this money, but they put all their eggs in one basket, and now it's starting to crumble because that one industry is having problems. So if you're at a bank that's doing something like this, which is a bad practice, and everybody who's ever looked into investing at all understands this. This is why people tell you to diversify your income. This is why people tell you to diversify your investments. This is why people tell you to diversify where you're putting money for your retirement, is so that you have a more stable and well-protected form of income for your investment and for your retirement. These banks, who are supposed to know what they're doing with money because they are banks, are not doing that, are going to fail because of poor business decisions and poor business ethics. They shouldn't get a bailout. They damn sure shouldn't, especially in California, where over the last 3 years of the pandemic, they've actually gone through and shut down private businesses that are small en masse. In fact, I'd heard something and seen something about like 70% of California's restaurants in like the LA area were closed down during that period of time, which is a wild amount of businesses to just shut down because of government policy, right? Can we all agree that 70% of privately owned businesses, which restaurants are small businesses that impact small earners on a large scale, can we agree that if we can't save 70% of businesses by simply allowing them to conduct business, because California wasn't allowing people to go and eat at restaurants? And then we also saw plenty of examples during the pandemic on the news and social media that people were posting that owned these restaurants, where they were being told that they couldn't operate their business in the parking lot. And this caused people to lose their business because of government policy around the pandemic and how to respond to it. They should not, therefore, be pushing for the same policymakers. Gavin Newsom shouldn't be trying to sit there and slide in like, oh, well, they have options to handle this, and just not say what they are when he's talking about bailing them out, when he didn't allow businesses in his state to remain businesses because they were small businesses his money was not tied to during the pandemic because of his policies. But that's what they're doing. They're trying to orchestrate this like it's going to hurt you, the little guy, but they're ignoring the fact that their policies directly destroyed you, the little guy. If you started a business prior to the pandemic happening, it's probably gone now because you didn't have the ability to conduct business because of their policy. But now they want to be able to do something through government and policy to save another bank because they make money off of the industry around that bank. Keep this in mind. It doesn't matter what party they are, left or right. They do this regularly to protect the people who give them their money outside of the money they already get from your taxes. Don't be fooled.